Few things bypass human logic faster than being jolted awake in the dead of night by a voice calling your name, especially when that voice sounds exactly like your mother. In rural Bengal, this specific scenario is tied to a well-documented local phenomenon. Take the case of a 17-year-old boy named Aryan. He was spending his summer vacation in the Birbhum district, staying inside a massive Zamindari-era ancestral home, characterized by high ceilings and incredibly thick brick walls. It was 2 a.m. on a sweltering summer night. A sudden power cut had killed the ceiling fans and plunged the house into near-total darkness. The only ambient sound was the loud, chaotic whispering of wind tearing through an adjacent bamboo grove. Waking up with intense thirst, Aryan navigated the dark house using a phone flashlight to get a glass of water. On his way back to bed, he heard his mother's voice calling out to him, but the sound wasn't coming from her bedroom. It was coming from right outside the locked back door. When a sudden blackout removes all visual context, the human brain relies entirely on audio to map its surroundings. In a highly isolated rural setting, that sensory deprivation primes the mind to accept familiar cues without question, leaving a person incredibly vulnerable to deception. Curious, analytical tone. Aryan walked up to the heavy wooden door and asked if she was outside. The familiar voice immediately replied, claiming she had stepped out for fresh air, forgotten her flashlight, and needed him to open the door because she was afraid of the dark. This diagram illustrates the physical layout of the property. The back door opened directly out to the bamboo grove, and Aryan had personally checked that the latch was locked from the inside before going to sleep. If his mother had woken up and decided to walk outside using an alternate exit, her path would have forced her to walk directly past the kitchen. Aryan had been standing right there. He would have seen her. Outside the door, the environment abruptly shifted. The deafening sound of crickets, the barking dogs, the wind in the bamboo, every ambient nocturnal noise instantly flatlined into dead silence. Then came the third call to open the door. The voice was absolutely identical to his mother's pitch and cadence, but the emotional delivery was gone. It sounded entirely flat and robotic, almost as if an audio recording was being played back by a machine that didn't understand the context of the words. The contradiction between the floor plan and the sound, combined with the sudden drop in ambient noise, indicates that the situation has moved beyond a simple error in Aryan's perception. Local folklore explicitly categorizes the entity waiting outside that door. They call it the Nishi. It operates on a strictly defined schedule, confined to the darkest hours between midnight and 3 a.m. References to the Nishi appear in written Bengali literature dating back to the 19th century. According to the lore, it is not a restless ghost. It is a fabricated entity created via dark tantric practices to act as an untraceable assassin, designed specifically to carry out acts of revenge. This is a representation of a traditional Bengali astrological chart. The folklore dictates that the Nishi has incredibly specific targeting parameters. It only hunts individuals who are physically alone in the dark, or those who possess inherently weak astrological horoscopes. Because its physical form is described as a blurry, shape-shifting mass without a distinct face, its primary weapon is sound. It relies on the flawless auditory mimicry of a victim's closest loved ones. The most crucial detail about the Nishi is its limitation. It cannot force its way inside a home. Its singular objective is to hypnotize victims using a familiar voice, compelling them to willingly unlatch the door and follow the entity out into the dark, where they are led to their deaths. By combining these traits, the Nishi emerges as a highly specialized parasitic weapon. It lacks physical brute force, relying entirely on the manipulation of human empathy to bypass locked doors. Standing in the pitch-black hallway, mesmerized by the voice, he reached out and placed his hand on the metal latch of the back door. Before he could slide the bolt open, someone violently grabbed him from behind. A hand clamped tightly over his mouth, violently enforcing absolute silence. It was his grandmother. Pulling him into the main bedroom, She aimed her flashlight toward the far corner. Lying comfortably under a mosquito net, fast asleep, was Arian's real mother. With the deception exposed and the door remaining locked, the entity outside dropped the human act. The flat robotic voice was immediately replaced by the sound of heavy claws aggressively tearing at the wooden door panels, accompanied by guttural, animalistic wailing. Arian survived the night purely because an older generation understood the strict rules of engagement for a local predator, stepping in to physically block a fatal error in judgment. The next morning, as sunlight returned to the village, the family opened the back door to inspect the courtyard. There was a distinct pair of footprints, but the geometry of the stance was biologically impossible. One foot pointed straight toward the door. The other was rotated a full 180 degrees backward. This graphic illustrates the primary scientific counterargument. Under extreme stress, surrounded by pitch darkness, a sleep-deprived brain actively seeks familiar patterns. It takes ambient noise, like wind, and forces the auditory cortex to fill in the blanks, manifesting a hallucination of a mother's voice. While the brain often projects patterns during high-stress episodes, that neurological explanation fails to account for the physical backward prints left in the courtyard. For those living in rural Bengal, dissecting the psychology of the event is entirely secondary to surviving it, and survival relies on a single fail-safe defense mechanism known as the Rule of Three. The tantric curse that animates the Nishi comes with a rigid magical limitation. The entity is bound by the parameters of its creation to call out a target's name a maximum of exactly 3 times. It is physically incapable of manifesting a fourth call. The application of this rule is chillingly simple. If you hear a loved one call your name from outside in the dark, do not answer. You stand in the silence and you count. You wait to see if they call a 4th time. If the 4th call never comes, you walk away. Because whether you are facing a glitch in your own stressed psychology or an ancient curse hunting in the dark, respecting boundaries is the only way to